My son looked at me in front of the entire Thanksgiving table and said, "Mom, we didn't save you a seat because you didn't contribute this year." For a moment, the room became so quiet I could hear the oven fan humming behind Claire's polished white kitchen cabinets. I was standing in the doorway with my pumpkin pie still warm in both hands. The same pie I had baked every Thanksgiving since Brandon was 6 years old. The crust had taken me 2 tries that morning because my fingers were stiff from the cold, and I had driven 23 miles across Columbus traffic with it balanced carefully on the passenger seat like something precious. I had worn my cream sweater, the one my late husband Richard used to say made me look soft and elegant, and I had even pinned my silver hair back the way he liked. I thought I was walking into a family dinner. Instead, I walked into a room where everyone already knew there was no place for me. The dining table was set for 10. White plates, gold napkin rings, crystal glasses catching the light from the chandelier. Brandon sat at the head of the table in the chair that used to belong to his father. Claire stood beside him in a burgundy dress, one hand resting on his shoulder, her smile gentle enough for guests and sharp enough for me. Their friends were there. Her parents were there. Even Mr. Caldwell from Brandon's firm had a place card in neat black lettering. I looked for mine. I looked slowly, carefully, giving the room every chance to prove I had misunderstood. There was no Eleanor Whitmore. No plate. No folded napkin. No chair pulled slightly back in welcome. Just a narrow space near the sideboard where I was expected to stand and pretend I did not notice. "I brought the pie," I said, because sometimes the heart says ordinary things when it has no idea how to survive the truth. Claire gave a small laugh, the kind that never reaches the eyes. "That's sweet, Eleanor. But everyone here helped with the actual dinner. We thought it was only fair." Fair. That word landed harder than Brandon's. I looked at my son, waiting for the boy I raised to surface somewhere behind the expensive watch, the confident posture, the rehearsed indifference. But he only leaned back and said, "Don't make this uncomfortable, Mom. You know how tight things have been. You didn't contribute this year." I almost smiled then, not because it was funny, but because of the house around him. The hardwood floors I helped pay for when his business nearly collapsed. The dining set Richard and I bought as an anniversary gift after Brandon said he wanted to host real family holidays. The very roof over his head, protected by choices I had made quietly for years. Choices he had mistaken for weakness because I never handed him an invoice for being his mother. I set the pie on the counter. My hands were steady. That surprised me most. I looked at the empty space where my chair should have been, then back at my son. "Then I suppose," I said softly, "I should stop contributing." No one answered. Claire's smile faded just a little. Brandon frowned, as if he had heard something in my voice he could not name. I picked up my purse, turned toward the door, and walked out without raising my voice. The cold November air met me on the porch, clean and sharp. Behind me, laughter tried to start again, but it sounded thinner now. The next morning, I went to the bank. And that was when I learned they had already tried to take much more than my seat. The drive home that night felt longer than 23 miles. I kept both hands on the steering wheel and watched the red taillights blur ahead of me on the freeway, one car after another moving toward homes where somebody had remembered to pull out an extra chair. The pumpkin pie smell still lingered in my car, warm cinnamon and butter, but now it seemed foolish, almost childish, like I had carried a piece of my old life into a room that had already agreed to throw it away. I did not cry. Not then. I had learned after Richard died that tears do not always come when pain is fresh. Sometimes the body stays polite until it reaches a locked door. My house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. The porch light had burned out 2 weeks earlier, and Brandon had promised to come replace it because the fixture was too high for me to reach safely. He never did. I sat in the car for a full minute, looking at the shadow of the house Richard and I had downsized into after selling our larger place in Worthington. It was not fancy. 2 bedrooms, a narrow kitchen, a small den with his old leather chair still angled toward the window. But it had been ours. That mattered. Inside, the silence greeted me like an old coat. I hung my cream sweater carefully on the back of a dining chair, even though it smelled faintly of Claire's expensive cranberry candle and the humiliation I had carried out of her kitchen. On my own table, there was no turkey, no gold napkin rings, no crystal glasses. Just a stack of mail, my reading glasses, and the small ceramic salt shaker Lily had painted for me in 3rd grade. I touched it with one finger, and felt something in my chest tighten. Before Claire came into our lives, Thanksgiving had always been my holiday. Richard carved the turkey because he believed ceremony mattered, and Brandon would sneak pieces of crispy skin from the platter when he thought I was not looking. I would pretend to scold him. He would grin, the same crooked grin he had as a grown man when he wanted me to forgive something too quickly. After Richard passed, I tried to keep the tradition alive. The first year, Brandon hugged me in the kitchen and said, "Mom, we will always do this together." The second year, Claire suggested hosting because their dining room was larger. The third year, she changed the menu and told me not to bring stuffing because her mother had a lighter recipe. By the fourth year, I was asked to come later after most of the cooking was done. This year, I was asked to bring pie. Only pie. I should have seen the pattern sooner. But mothers are skilled at explaining away the small removals. A missed phone call becomes a busy workday. A forgotten invitation becomes an honest mistake. A cold glance becomes stress. We build bridges out of excuses because the alternative is admitting our children know exactly where to hurt us. I made tea and sat at my kitchen table without turning on the television. Across from me, Richard's chair stayed empty, but it did not feel absent the way it once had. It felt like a witness. I thought of the way Brandon had said I did not contribute, as if contribution only meant the visible things on a holiday table. He had not seen me at 32, working weekends at the school office so we could cover his braces. He had not seen me at 47, signing papers beside Richard when the bank said our house could secure Brandon's first business loan. He had not seen me at 64, moving money from my savings after Claire called in tears because Brandon's company payroll was short and he was too proud to ask. Or maybe he had seen it. Maybe that was worse. I opened the drawer beside the table and pulled out the folder Mr. Howard Ellis had told me to keep close after Richard died. The blue folder. The one Brandon said was probably full of outdated paperwork. I laid it on the table and rested my palm on top of it. The house was quiet. The tea went cold. And for the first time in years, I stopped trying to protect my son from the truth of what I had given him. The blue folder stayed on my kitchen table until morning, untouched but impossible to ignore. I slept in pieces, waking every hour to the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the wall clock Richard had bought at a flea market in Dayton. By 6:30, gray light had begun to press against the curtains, and I was already dressed in navy slacks, a wool coat, and the same practical shoes I wore to church. I did not feel brave. I felt clear. There is a difference. Brave people charge forward because they believe they can win. Clear people move because staying still has become more dangerous than knowing the truth. I made 1 cup of coffee, left half of it untouched, and opened the folder. Inside were bank letters, trust summaries, property records, and a handwritten note from Richard clipped to the front page. "Eleanor, keep this close. Ask Howard before signing anything." I ran my finger over his handwriting, the letters firm and slightly slanted, and for a moment the kitchen seemed to fill with him again. Not his voice, exactly. His caution, his steady way of seeing trouble before anyone else admitted it was there. I remembered the call from Mr. Howard Ellis 1 week before. Thanksgiving. It had come while I was folding laundry in the den, Brandon's old college sweatshirt on my lap, because I still wore it around the house on cold mornings. Howard had sounded careful, too careful. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "has Brandon or Claire asked you to review any financial documents lately?" I told him Claire had mentioned simplifying accounts for tax purposes, and Brandon had said it might be easier if he had authority to help me manage things online. There was a pause on the line. Not long, just long enough for my stomach to tighten. Then Howard said, "Do not sign anything until I see it." At the time, I thought he was only being protective. He had handled our accounts for years, first for Richard's construction supply business, then for the family trust after Richard got sick. Howard was the kind of man who still mailed Christmas cards with handwritten notes and wore the same gray overcoat every winter. He did not dramatize. He did not gossip. So when he told me to be cautious, I listened, but I did not yet understand. Looking back, the signs had been gathering around me like leaves before a storm. Claire had started dropping by with folders tucked under her arm, always smiling, always using words that sounded helpful. "At your age, Eleanor, paperwork can get overwhelming. Brandon only wants to protect you. We do not want the state getting involved if something happens." She would say these things while standing in my kitchen, admiring the curtains she had once called outdated, touching my shoulder as if tenderness could soften control. Brandon had been less polished. He avoided details. He told me not to worry. He said, "Mom, it is just routine." Routine. That was what people called things when they did not want you to look too closely. 3 days before Thanksgiving, a thick envelope arrived from a financial services office I did not recognize. The letter inside referred to a request for amended access to the Whitmore Family Trust. My name was on the first page, but the email listed beneath it was not mine. It was Claire's. When I called Brandon, he sighed before I had finished speaking. "Mom, please do not make this into something." Claire was just helping. Helping with what? I asked. "With keeping things organized," he said. "You know how complicated Dad left everything." That sentence hurt more than he knew. Richard had not left things complicated. He had left them protected. That morning after Thanksgiving, I placed the folder in my tote bag, locked my front door, and drove 12 miles to the downtown branch where Howard kept his office. The streets were quiet, still half asleep after the holiday. In the elevator, I looked at my reflection in the polished metal doors. 68 years old. Silver hair. Tired eyes. A woman her family had mistaken for easy to move. When the doors opened, Howard was already waiting near reception. He did not smile. He simply nodded and said, "Mrs. Whitmore, I am glad you came." And in that moment, before he showed me a single page, I knew the missing chair had only been the beginning. Howard led me into his office and closed the door with the kind of quiet care people use around hospital rooms and old secrets. His office had not changed much since Richard was alive. Same walnut desk. Same framed photograph of Lake Erie behind him. Same brass clock ticking softly on the bookshelf. Richard used to sit in the leather chair by the window while Howard explained market reports, and I would sit beside him with a notebook, writing down the numbers Richard pretended he did not need me to remember. That morning, I sat alone. Howard placed a thin stack of papers in front of me, then folded his hands. "Before I show you this, I need you to understand something," he said. "Your husband was very specific about protecting your position in the trust." I nodded, though my throat had tightened. Richard was specific about everything. Howard almost smiled, but it faded quickly. "That is true." He turned the first page toward me. At the top was my name, Eleanor Whitmore, followed by language stating that I was voluntarily requesting limited access to my own accounts so Brandon could assume management responsibilities. I read the sentence twice, then a third time. The words stayed the same. Voluntarily. Limited access. Management responsibilities. They were clean words. Office words. The kind of words people use when they want something ugly to sound reasonable. "I never requested this," I said. My voice was calm enough that even I barely recognized it. "I know," Howard replied. "That is why I called you." He showed me the next page. A draft letter from Claire, written as if it had come from me, explaining that I had become forgetful, overwhelmed, and dependent on Brandon for daily decisions. There was no anger in the language. That made it worse. It was polite, concerned, almost loving. A stranger reading it might have pictured a fragile widow losing her grip on life, not a woman who still balanced her checkbook to the penny and remembered every birthday in the family without needing a reminder from a phone. I looked out the window at the gray November sky. Somewhere across town, Brandon and Claire were probably cleaning up after their perfect holiday dinner, rinsing gravy boats, stacking plates, laughing about how uncomfortable I had looked standing there with my pie. They had not been careless. They had been preparing the room before I entered it. No chair, no place card, no contribution. It was not just cruelty. It was a story they needed everyone to believe. If I was useless at the table, then maybe I was useless on paper too. "There is more," Howard said gently. He slid another document forward. This one carried Brandon's signature. Not Claire's. Brandon's. My son had signed beneath a statement saying he believed I was no longer capable of managing family financial matters without supervision. For several seconds, I did not move. The brass clock ticked. A car horn sounded faintly from the street below. Life continued, which felt almost rude. I thought of Brandon at 8 years old, standing on a chair beside me, covered in flour, trying to cut biscuits with a drinking glass. I thought of him at 17, angry because Richard would not buy him a new truck, then coming to me later, ashamed, asking if I thought he was selfish. I had told him no. I had told him he was young. I had told him his heart would grow into his responsibilities. I had believed that. Mothers believe their own prayers long after the world stops. answering them. Did he come here himself? I asked. Howard hesitated. Claire delivered most of the paperwork, but Brandon signed the supporting statement. I verified the signature. There it was. Quiet. Final. Not a misunderstanding. Not Claire acting alone. My son had placed his name beneath a lie about me. I touched the edge of the paper with one finger. It felt ordinary. That surprised me. Something that could erase a woman's dignity should have felt heavier. Howard opened the trust binder and turned to a marked section. Richard anticipated pressure, he said. He added a protective clause 18 months before he passed. My eyes lifted to his. Howard read slowly, giving each sentence room to land. If any beneficiary attempts to coerce, diminish, misrepresent, or legally displace Eleanor Whitmore from her authority or benefits under this trust, all discretionary access granted to that beneficiary may be suspended pending review. I sat back. For the first time since Thanksgiving dinner, I breathed all the way in. Richard had seen something I had refused to see. Maybe not the whole shape of it. Maybe not the empty chair, or Claire's smile, or Brandon's cold sentence in front of guests. But he had known love was not always enough to keep greed polite. Howard looked at me over the papers. Mrs. Whitmore, what would you like to do? I folded my hands in my lap, the way I had done at church, at funerals, at parent-teacher meetings, during every difficult moment when dignity was the only thing I could still control. I want copies of everything, I said. And then I want to know exactly how much of my contribution they are still living on. Howard gave me copies in a thick manila envelope, the kind Richard used to bring home from the office with receipts tucked inside and notes written across the corners. I held it against my chest as I walked back to the parking garage, not because I was afraid someone would take it, but because paper can become the only solid thing in your hands when family turns soft and slippery. The city was moving like any other Friday after Thanksgiving. People carried shopping bags, coffee cups, leftover holiday cheer. I sat in my car. For a while before starting the engine, looking at the envelope on the passenger seat where the pumpkin pie had been the night before. One offering replaced by another. Sweetness replaced by proof. I drove home without the radio on. At my kitchen table, I spread the documents in careful rows. There were account summaries, property records, copies of wire transfers, and old loan agreements I had nearly forgotten because I had never helped Brandon with the intention of remembering. That was the dangerous thing about a mother's generosity. It left your hands quietly. Then years later someone looked you in the eye and told you it had never existed. The first statement showed a transfer from my savings to Brandon's company 8 years earlier, when his first major client delayed payment and he could not meet payroll. $38,000. Claire had called me that day before she and Brandon were married. She was polite then, almost shy. Brandon was embarrassed, she said. Brandon did not want Richard to know. Brandon just needed a bridge for a few weeks. I gave it because mothers hear the tremor behind their children's pride. He repaid some of it eventually, but not all. I never asked for the rest. The next document was tied to the house in Columbus, the one where I had stood without a chair. Richard and I had helped with the down payment, $120,000 from a joint investment account we had built over 35 years. Brandon called it a loan at first, then a gift. Then, over time, nothing at all. I remembered standing in that empty dining room before the furniture arrived, Claire walking through with paint samples, saying the light was perfect for hosting family holidays. I had believed her. I had pictured grandchildren at that table, winter coats piled on the stairs, Richard laughing with Brandon over football while I checked the rolls in the oven. I had not pictured myself erased from the place my own sacrifice helped create. By mid-afternoon, my tea had gone cold beside the papers. I was reading a trust distribution summary when my doorbell rang. The sound startled me so sharply that I pressed a hand to my chest. Through the front window, I saw Lily standing on my porch in a green school jacket, her backpack hanging from one shoulder even though there was no school that day. She looked 16 in the way only 16-year-old girls can look when they are carrying an adult truth they should never have been handed. I opened the door, and before I could speak, her face crumpled. "Grandma," she said, "I am so sorry." I stepped aside and let her in. She smelled like cold air and peppermint gum. In the kitchen, she stared at the papers on the table, then looked away as if they were something private. "I heard them," she whispered. "Last night, after you left." I pulled out a chair for her, the simple oak chair Brandon had once fixed for me when one leg wobbled. Lily sat down slowly. Her hands were clenched around her phone. Mom said it worked, she told me. She said you looked embarrassed enough to be easier now. The words entered the room and stayed there. I did not ask easier for what. I already knew. Lily swallowed hard, tears bright in her eyes. Dad told her not to talk so loud. Then Mom said they had to get you to sign before Christmas, before Mr. Ellis made trouble. She placed her phone on the table, but did not let go of it. I recorded part of it. I know that sounds wrong. I did not know what else to do. I looked at my granddaughter, at Richard's blue eyes and her young face, at the guilt that did not belong to her. Truth is not wrong, sweetheart, I said. Using love to corner someone is. She tapped the screen. Claire's voice filled my kitchen, smooth and familiar. After Thanksgiving, she will feel unwanted enough to agree. Then Brandon's voice, lower, tired, but clear. Just make sure she believes she has no place here. Lily began to cry silently. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. My own hand did not shake. Not anymore. I looked at the blue folder, the manila envelope, the phone between us, and the empty chair across from me. For years, I had been afraid that uncovering the truth would break what was left of my family. But sitting there with my granddaughter's small, trembling hand under mine, I understood something colder and cleaner. The truth had not broken the family. It had simply turned on the lights. The recording ended after Brandon's last sentence, but its silence stayed in my kitchen much longer than his voice did. Lily kept apologizing until the words lost shape, and I kept telling her she had done nothing wrong. Still, I could see the fear in her eyes, the fear children feel when they discover adults are not as solid as they seemed. She had come to me expecting me to collapse. I think part of her had prepared herself to hold me together with trembling hands and a teenage heart. But I did not collapse. I made her hot chocolate in Richard's Old Navy mug, added extra marshmallows the way she liked, and wrapped a knitted blanket around her shoulders. Ordinary things. Small things. The kind of things that keep a person human when betrayal tries to turn her into stone. We sat at the table while the winter light thinned outside the window. Lily told me pieces of what she had heard over the past month. Claire speaking in low voices after dinner. Brandon shutting his office door whenever Lily passed the hallway. Phrases like power of attorney, outdated trust, emotional leverage, and before she changes her mind. Lily did not understand all of it, but she understood the tone. Children always do. They know when a room has become unsafe, even if no one raises their voice. Dad said you would be better off letting them handle everything, she whispered. Mom said you were too sentimental to make practical decisions. I looked down at the papers in front of me. Sentimental. That was another word people used when they wanted to take something from an older woman without sounding greedy. If I kept Richard's chair, I was sentimental. If I remembered who paid for what, I was bitter. If I asked questions, I was confused. If I stayed quiet, I was convenient. I reached for a clean legal pad from the drawer and began making a list. Not a dramatic list. Not a revenge list written in anger. A record. Dates. Amounts. Names. The $38,000 transferred to Brandon's company. The $120,000 toward the Columbus house. The trust clause Richard added 18 months before he passed. The false email address. The statement Brandon signed. The recording on Lily's phone. Each line steadied me. Each fact pulled me farther away from the fog of motherhood and closer to the ground of truth. Lily watched me write. Are you going to tell Dad I gave it to you? She asked. Her voice was very small. I set the pen down. No, sweetheart. Not unless it becomes necessary, and not without protecting you first. She nodded, but her shoulders stayed tight. I do not want him to hate me. That nearly broke me. Not because of what Brandon had done to me, but because of what he had placed on his own daughter. A child should not have to choose between honesty and being loved. I took her hand again. Your father is responsible for his choices. You are not. After Lily left, I called Howard. He answered on the second ring, as if he had been expecting me. I told him about the recording, about Lily, about Claire's words. He was quiet for a moment, then said, Mrs. Whitmore, you need an attorney before they contact you again. I already knew who he meant. Margaret Collins had handled Richard's final estate updates. She was in her early 60s, sharp-eyed, calm, and impossible to rush. Richard trusted her because she read every line twice and smiled only when there was a reason. I called her office before I could talk myself into waiting. Her assistant said Margaret was out until Monday. Then, 5 minutes later, Margaret herself called me back. Eleanor, she said, and the way she spoke my name told me Howard had already warned her years ago that this day might come. I told her everything from the empty chair to the false paperwork. I expected questions. Instead, she asked only one. Do you still have Richard's blue folder? I looked at it on the table. Yes. Good, she said. Bring it Monday morning. And Eleanor, do not answer calls from Brandon or Claire this weekend. Let them speak into silence for once. After we hung up, my phone lit up almost immediately. Brandon, then Claire, then Brandon again. I watched their names appear and disappear against the dark screen. For years, I had answered because I was his mother. That night, I let it ring because I was finally mine. Monday morning arrived cold and pale, with frost silvering the edges of my windshield and the neighborhood still quiet behind closed garage doors. I wore a charcoal coat, pearl earrings Richard had given me on our 40th anniversary, and lipstick I had not used since his funeral. Not because I wanted to look powerful. Power had never interested me the way dignity did. I simply wanted to recognize myself when the day was over. Margaret Collins's office was on the 4th floor of a brick building near downtown Columbus, tucked between a title company and a small accounting firm. No marble lobby, no dramatic conference room, just clean windows, shelves of legal books, and a receptionist who looked at me kindly without asking why my hands were wrapped so tightly around a blue folder. Margaret met me at her doorway. She had short gray hair, narrow glasses, and the steady expression of a woman who had spent years watching families become strangers over money they once promised did not matter. Come in, Eleanor, she said. Howard sent over what he could. I sat across from her desk and placed Richard's folder between us. For a moment, neither of us opened it. Margaret rested her palm lightly on the cover, almost like a blessing. Richard was worried near the end, she said. He never wanted to burden you with it while you were caring for him. But he saw the way Brandon deferred to Claire. He saw how quickly gratitude can become entitlement when no one names it. I looked at the books behind her, because looking at her felt too close to hearing Richard speak. Why did he not tell me? Margaret opened the folder. Because he hoped he was wrong. That sentence sat quietly in the room. Hope. The kindest trap in a family. Margaret reviewed every page with me. The trust. The protective clause. The attempted access change. The statement Brandon signed. Lily's recording, which Margaret asked me to transfer to a secure file without naming how I received it. She did not react with surprise. She reacted with order. That steadied me more than sympathy would have. Sympathy softens the pain. Order shows you where to place it. They have not succeeded yet, she said, drawing a neat line beneath a paragraph in the trust. But the attempt is clear enough to trigger review. We can suspend Brandon's discretionary access immediately, freeze any pending changes, revoke temporary permissions, and request a full accounting of trust-related benefits he has received. I listened to each word. Suspend. Freeze. Revoke. Accounting. They sounded harsh in isolation, but together they felt like locks sliding back into place on a house I had been told I no longer belonged in. Will this ruin him? I asked. Margaret looked at me over her glasses. No. It will require him to live without access he was never supposed to control through pressure. There was a difference. I needed to hear it. I was not trying to destroy my son. I was trying to stop letting him destroy the truth and call it family management. Margaret turned another page toward me and placed a pen beside it. This authorizes formal notice. Once filed, Brandon and Claire will receive communication through this office. Not through your kitchen table. Not through late-night phone calls. Not through guilt. My phone, buried in my purse, buzzed as if summoned by her words. I did not need to look. Brandon had called 7 times over the weekend. Claire had left 3 messages that began sweetly and ended sharp. Margaret glanced at my purse. Let it wait. So I did. I signed the first document slowly, my name forming across the line in blue ink. Eleanor Grace Whitmore. Not Mom. Not Richard's widow. Not an old woman who could be managed. My full name. My legal name. My hand was steady by the second signature. By the third, I felt something inside me settle, not into anger, but into shape. Margaret gathered the pages and placed them in a folder marked urgent. There will be a meeting, she said. They will ask to explain. I looked toward the window where downtown traffic moved below us in careful lanes. I have listened to explanations for years. Margaret nodded. Then this time, let the documents speak first. When I left her office, The sun had climbed above the buildings, bright against the frosted glass. My phone buzzed again in my purse. Brandon. I stepped into the elevator and watched the doors close. For once, I did not feel pulled toward his voice. I felt protected from it. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 10 in the morning, exactly 1 week after Thanksgiving, as if the calendar itself had decided to measure what a single dinner had cost. Margaret offered to let me join by phone, but I said no. Some rooms need your body in them. Not for drama. Not for victory. For witness. I arrived 15 minutes early and sat in the small conference room with my coat folded across my lap and a paper cup of water untouched in front of me. Margaret sat to my right, arranging documents in precise stacks. Howard sat to my left, quiet and solemn, his gray overcoat draped over the back of his chair. There were 2 empty seats across from us. I looked at them for a long moment. Empty chairs had become a language in my family. This time, I understood it fluently. Brandon arrived first, rushed and red-faced, wearing the navy suit he saved for investor meetings. Claire followed close behind in a camel coat, her hair perfect, her expression carefully wounded. She looked at me as if I had embarrassed her by existing in a room with paperwork. Brandon did not sit right away. "Mom, what is this?" he asked, holding up the notice Margaret had sent. "Why are you doing this?" I wanted to answer him as his mother. I wanted to say, because you let your wife turn my grief into an opportunity, because you signed a lie, because you looked at me in your own dining room and made me smaller than a guest. But Margaret placed one finger lightly on the top page, and I remembered what she had told me. "Let the documents speak first." "Please sit down," Margaret said. Brandon dropped into the chair. Claire sat more slowly, crossing her ankles, her mouth pressed into a thin line. Margaret began with the attempted change of access. She slid the first document across the table, then the false letter written in my name, then the statement bearing Brandon's signature. Each page landed softly. That was the strange thing. The truth did not shout. It simply arrived, one sheet at a time. Brandon glanced at the papers and looked away. Claire leaned forward. "This is being taken completely out of context. We were trying to help Eleanor. She gets overwhelmed." Margaret turned to me. "Mrs. Whitmore, were you overwhelmed when these forms were prepared?" "No," I said. One word. "Clean." Claire's cheeks colored, but she kept her voice gentle. "Eleanor, you know we love you. After Richard passed, you were not yourself." I looked at her then. Really looked. At the soft concern she wore like perfume. At the hands folded neatly on the table. At the woman who had learned that cruelty works best when wrapped in manners. "I was grieving," I said. "That is not the same as being incapable." Howard opened the financial file. He reviewed the trust distributions, the house contribution, the emergency transfer to Brandon's business, the accounts Brandon had accessed over the years with my permission and Richard's structure behind him. With every number, Brandon's face changed. Annoyance first, then discomfort, then something close to shame, though not enough to comfort me. Claire stopped interrupting when Howard reached the $120,000 tied to their house. The room became very still. Margaret then played the recording. Claire's voice filled the conference room, smooth and unmistakable. "After Thanksgiving, she will feel unwanted enough to agree." Brandon closed his eyes. Claire stared at the table. Then came my son's voice. "Just make sure she believes she has no place here." No one moved when it ended. The silence afterward had weight. Not loud, not explosive, just complete. Brandon finally looked at me. For the first time in a long while, he looked like the boy who had broken my favorite lamp and waited for me to love him anyway. "Mom," he said, but the word had nowhere to go. Margaret did not let it soften the room. She opened the trust binder and read Richard's protective clause aloud. Her voice remained even as she explained that Brandon's discretionary access was suspended. All pending authority changes were frozen. Claire had no standing in any trust matter, and a full accounting would begin immediately. Brandon pushed back from the table. "You are cutting me off?" he asked. I folded my hands in my lap. "No, Brandon, you said I did not contribute. So I removed every contribution you were still living on." Claire's eyes flashed. "This is revenge." I turned to her slowly. "No, revenge would have been humiliating you in front of your guests. This is paperwork." Howard looked down, almost hiding the smallest breath of approval. Margaret gathered the signed notices and placed them in front of Brandon. "All communication goes through my office from this point forward." Brandon stared at the pages. Claire stared at me. I stood, buttoned my coat, and picked up my purse. At the door, Brandon spoke again, quieter this time. Mom, please. I paused, not because I was weakening, but because the word still hurt. Please had sounded different when he was small. Please, one more story. Please, do not tell Dad. Please, can I come home this weekend? I looked back at him, and I let myself see both versions of my son at once. The boy I raised. The man who signed the lie. You denied me a place at your table, I said. Richard made sure you could not deny me my own. Then I walked out before either of them could turn my pain into another negotiation. A year later, I hosted Thanksgiving in my own house, at my own table, with every chair chosen on purpose. It was not the kind of dinner Claire would have photographed for social media. There were no gold napkin rings, no crystal glasses, no perfect centerpiece ordered from a florist. I used the white plates Richard and I bought in 1983, the ones with tiny blue flowers around the edge. I roasted a small turkey, made mashed potatoes with real butter, and baked 2 pumpkin pies because Lily had asked if she could take one home. The house smelled the way a home should smell in late November, warm and ordinary and forgiving, but not forgetful. Lily arrived first, carrying grocery store flowers and wearing the green scarf I had knitted for her the winter before. She hugged me longer than usual, then helped set the table without asking where anything was. Howard came next with a pecan pie from a bakery downtown, apologizing twice because he did not bake. Margaret brought a bottle of sparkling cider and a stack of old stories about Richard that made me laugh in places I thought had gone quiet forever. My neighbor Mrs. Alvarez came with sweet potatoes, and Pastor Daniel stopped by after visiting shut-ins, saying he could stay only an hour and then staying for 3. 6 people around my table. 7 chairs. The extra one remained empty at the end, not as a wound, but as a reminder. I no longer begged to be included where love had been replaced by convenience. Brandon sent flowers that morning. White roses, too formal for a mother, with a card tucked between them. Mom, I am sorry. I have been thinking about everything. I hope we can talk someday. His handwriting was still the same, slightly hurried, leaning to the right. Claire's name was not on the card. I placed the flowers on the sideboard, not the table. That felt right. An apology given after consequences may still matter, but it does not get the seed of honor before it proves it has roots. The accounting took months. It did not destroy Brandon, though he told several relatives I had tried to ruin him. What it did was remove his access to money he had treated as invisible air. He had to refinance parts of his life, answer questions he thought age had disqualified me from asking, and learn the difference between help freely given and control quietly stolen. Claire stopped calling me Eleanor in that syrupy voice. In fact, she stopped calling altogether. I found I did not miss it. Lily still visited every other Saturday. Sometimes she brought homework. Sometimes she brought silence. Both were welcome. I never asked her to choose sides. I only made sure she knew my door did not require her to betray anyone to walk through it. That, more than any document, felt like the family legacy Richard would have wanted protected. During dinner, Margaret asked me if I missed the old Thanksgivings. I looked at Richard's empty chair in the den, then at Lily laughing because Howard had spilled gravy on his sleeve, then at the extra chair at the end of the table. I miss who I thought we were, I said, but I do not miss pretending. No one rushed to fill the silence. That was the gift of being with people who respected pain. They did not decorate it with easy advice. They let it breathe. After everyone left, Lily stayed behind to help with dishes. She dried the blue-flowered plates carefully, as if they were fine china. Before she walked out, she turned back and said, "Grandma, I am glad you did not let them make you small." I smiled then, truly smiled, and kissed her forehead. When the house was quiet again, I wrapped the remaining pie in foil, turned off the kitchen light, and stood for a moment beside the table. 1 year earlier, my son thought revenge meant I wanted to hurt him. He was wrong. My revenge was quieter than that. I let him live without every contribution he claimed I had never made. I let the papers tell the truth. I let silence answer the phone. And finally, after years of shrinking myself to fit into spaces they allowed me, I built a table where no one had to earn a seat by pretending not to see the truth.